I stood outside Le Bernardin watching my children through the window seated at their table for 5 when my daughter spotted me and waved dismissively. "Maybe a cheaper place would be better for you," she called out, her husband smirking beside her. That's when I started laughing, really laughing, because they had no idea that the distinguished gentleman approaching me with concern wasn't just any staff member. He was Marcus Sterling, the owner, and 25 years ago, I'd saved his life. My name is Bernice, and at 68 years old, I thought I understood my place in my children's lives. I lived quietly in my small one-bedroom apartment in Queens, the same building where I'd raised all 4 of them after their father passed. The walls held memories of birthday parties with homemade cakes, homework sessions at the kitchen table, and bedtime stories on the worn sofa that I still couldn't bear to replace. Every month for the past 15 years, we had maintained our family dinner tradition. Nothing fancy, just gathering at places where the food was good and the prices were reasonable. I would arrive early, usually at some chain restaurant, with decent portions and free refills, making sure we had a table big enough for everyone. These dinners were the highlight of my month, a chance to see my children all together to pretend for a few hours that we were still the close family we used to be. Sandra, my eldest at 45, always arrived in a rush of importance. She worked as a marketing executive at some firm downtown climbing ladders I never quite understood. Her husband Mark would trail behind her, checking his phone and making comments about the restaurant's health rating or the outdated decor. He had this way of looking at me like I was some quaint relic from a past his wife should have left behind. Robert, 43, and my only son managed finances for a company in Manhattan. He wore suits that cost more than my monthly Social Security check and drove a car that turned heads. Lately, he'd been making excuses about why his girlfriend couldn't join us. "She's traveling," he'd say, or "she has a work thing." But I knew the truth. I'd overheard him on the phone once explaining that his mother lived in that old building in Queens and worked as a seamstress before retiring. Patricia, at 41, had found her calling in real estate. She sold properties to wealthy clients' houses with price tags that made my head spin. She developed this habit of studying my appearance whenever we met her eyes, traveling from my carefully mended clothes to my sensible shoes. "Mother," she'd say, "you really should let me take you shopping. Image is everything in this world." Thomas, my baby at 38, used to be different. He'd been the one to call just to chat, to stop by with takeout on random Tuesdays. But since his promotion to senior consultant at his tech firm, those calls had dwindled to holiday obligations and birthday texts. Success, it seemed, had made him too busy for his old mother. What none of them knew was that I hadn't always been just a seamstress. Before their father died, before grief drove me from my profession, I had been a trauma nurse at Kings County Hospital. I'd spent 12 years saving lives, working shifts that would break younger people, making decisions that meant the difference between life and death. But when James passed from a heart attack at 42, leaving me with 4 children and a mortgage, I couldn't bear the daily reminder of how I'd failed to save the one life that mattered most to me. So I became a seamstress, working from home so I could raise my children. I altered wedding dresses and hemmed pants, my skilled hands that once sutured wounds, now guiding fabric through my ancient Singer machine. It paid the bills, kept food on the table, and allowed me to be there when my children needed me. I never told them about the commendations gathering dust in my closet or the lives I'd saved. That was a different Bernice one who died with their father. The change in my children had been gradual, like erosion, wearing away at stone. It started with small things. Sandra suggesting I park my 20-year-old Honda around the corner when visiting her suburban home. Robert explaining why I couldn't attend his company holiday party. Patricia sending me links to appropriate clothing for mature women. Thomas forgetting to invite me to his housewarming party, then pretending it had been an oversight. The April morning that changed everything started like any other. I was sorting through mail, mostly advertisements and medical bills, when a certified letter caught my attention. The return address was a law firm I didn't recognize. My hands trembled slightly as I signed for it, remembering that certified letters rarely brought good news. But this one did. The letter was from the estate of Evelyn Morrison, a name that sent me spinning back 25 years to a cold February night in the emergency room. Evelyn had been brought in after a car accident, internal bleeding, threatening to claim her life. I'd been the lead nurse during her surgery, had held her hand in recovery, had visited her during my breaks to make sure she was healing properly. She'd been alone in the world, she told me, no family to speak of. We'd stayed in touch with Christmas cards for a few years before life got in the way. Now, according to this letter, she'd remembered me in her will. She'd passed away 3 months ago, leaving me a commercial property in Brooklyn that she'd inherited from her own parents. The lawyer requested a meeting to discuss the details of the inheritance. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands, trying to process this unexpected gift from the past. I decided not to tell my children right away. Something held me back, perhaps the memory of Mark's calculating eyes or Patricia's comments about my finances. This was my news to share when I felt ready, my small secret in a life that had become increasingly transparent and judged. The May family dinner was at an Italian restaurant in Forest Hills. I arrived early as always, securing our usual large table near the back. Sandra swept in 20 minutes late, Mark in tow, complaining about parking. Robert came alone again, his girlfriend mysteriously unavailable. Patricia brought her tablet showing million-dollar listings to Thomas while they waited for their drinks. "Mother," Sandra said, eyeing my cardigan, "didn't I give you a gift card to Nordstrom last Christmas?" "You did, dear. I'm saving it for something special." Mark snorted. "Define special. The senior discount day." The table laughed, that uncomfortable laugh that comes when a joke cuts too close to cruelty. I smiled and changed the subject to Thomas's new project, but I noticed how they talked over me, how their conversations flowed around me like I was a rock in their stream. The inheritance lingered in my thoughts as I watched my children. They discussed vacations I couldn't afford to join, restaurants I'd never visit, experiences that existed in a world beyond my reach. When the check came, I reached for it as I always did, dividing it carefully, calculating the tip to the penny. Sandra sighed and slipped an extra 20 onto the pile, making a show of it. "Really, Mother, you should let us treat you sometimes." But I knew what came with their treats: obligations, expectations, the subtle reminders that I was a burden they bore out of duty rather than love. That night, I made a decision. I would meet with the lawyer, explore this inheritance, but I would do it quietly. My children had made it clear where I stood in their lives. Perhaps it was time I figured out where I wanted to stand in my own. The Monday after that dinner, I took the subway to downtown Brooklyn to meet with Eleanor Walsh, the lawyer handling Evelyn Morrison's estate. The office building stood like a monument to success, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky. I felt out of place in my sensible shoes and dated coat, but Eleanor herself turned out to be a woman close to my age, with kind eyes and a warm handshake. "Mrs. Coleman," she said, gesturing to a leather chair across from her desk. "I'm so glad you could come. Evelyn spoke of you often in her final years." The story that unfolded left me speechless. Evelyn had invested her inheritance wisely, turning her parents' small commercial building into a valuable piece of real estate. The property now housed several successful businesses, generating substantial rental income. More than that, she'd left detailed instructions about her wishes. "She wanted you to have not just the building," Eleanor explained, "but also the accumulated rental income from the past 5 years. She felt strongly that you had given her additional years of life, and she wanted to ensure your security in return." The numbers made my head swim. The property itself was valued at $2.1 million, and the accumulated rental income added another $1.1 million. After a lifetime of counting pennies, I was looking at wealth I'd never imagined. Eleanor must have seen my shock. "Take your time processing this. There's no rush to make any decisions. The property is professionally managed, so the income will continue whether you choose to sell or keep it." I left that office in a daze, my mind struggling to reconcile this windfall with my daily reality of careful budgeting and worn furniture. On the subway ride home, I caught my reflection in the dark window and saw the same woman who'd left that morning, but everything had changed. 2 weeks later, I was adjusting a hem on a bridesmaid's dress when I heard voices in my building's hallway. Patricia's distinctive tone carried through my thin walls. "The super has to have a key. Just tell him she's been forgetful lately, that we're worried about her safety." My hands stilled on the fabric. I moved quietly to my door, pressing my ear against it. $50. That was Robert's voice. "Come on, man, my mother could be hurt in there." "She's not hurt," I heard Mr. Kowalski, our building superintendent, reply firmly. "I saw her this morning. She was fine." "Look, Patricia, again. We're just concerned children trying to help our mother. Surely you understand that—" "I understand plenty. The answer is no." Their footsteps retreated, and I stood there with my heart racing. Why were my children trying to get into my apartment? What were they looking for? The answer came sooner than expected. That Thursday, Sandra called to say she was stopping by with a friend who wanted to meet me. They arrived bearing coffee and pastries, Sandra unusually attentive as she introduced Dr. Helen Martinez. "Helen's a therapist," Sandra explained. "She specializes in helping seniors adjust to life changes." The woman was all professional smiles and gentle questions. How was I sleeping? Did I ever feel confused about dates or appointments? Had I noticed any changes in my memory? I played along, letting my hands shake slightly as I poured tea, pretending to lose my train of thought mid-sentence. All the while, I watched Dr. Martinez take notes, saw Sandra's satisfied nods. After they left, I sat in my quiet apartment and began to piece together what was happening. My children were building a case. But for what? The next family dinner provided more clues. They chose a place in Manhattan, this time closer to their offices than my home. I arrived to find them already deep in conversation, heads bent together over Robert's phone. "Mother." Thomas startled quickly, pocketing his device. "You're early." Traffic was light. I said, though, I'd actually been circling the block for 10 minutes, wanting to arrive at my usual time. The dinner was strange, full of probing questions disguised as concern. Sandra asked about my medications. Did I ever mix them up? Patricia wondered about my bills. Was I keeping track of due dates? Robert inquired about my savings. Was I being careful with my money? Even Thomas, usually the least intrusive, asked if I'd considered downsizing from my apartment. "It's just so much for you to maintain," he said. "Maybe something in an assisted living community would be easier." "I've been in that apartment for 35 years, I reminded them. "I raised you all there." "Exactly," Mark interjected, earning a sharp look from Sandra. "I mean, that's a long time. Things change. Neighborhoods decline." I watched them exchange glances, a whole conversation happening without words. My children, who couldn't coordinate their schedules for holidays, seemed remarkably united in this sudden concern for my well-being. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I'd gone to the basement to retrieve my sewing machine from storage when I found the lock on my unit broken. Inside, boxes had been moved, papers scattered. My old photo albums lay open on the floor, financial documents clearly rifled through. Fury replaced the hurt I'd been nursing. I gathered everything up, noting what had been disturbed. Someone had been looking for something specific. Financial information, property documents, anything of value. That evening, Mr. Kowalski knocked on my door. He was a good man, had been our super for 20 years, had watched my children grow up. "Mrs. Coleman," he said, discomfort written across his weathered face. "I thought you should know. Your son-in-law was here today. He tried to tell me you'd asked him to check your storage unit but lost the key." "I see, and—" "I told him no key, no entry, but—" He paused, clearly struggling. "The lock was broken when I did my rounds tonight. I have security footage if you need it." I thanked him, assured him I would handle it, and asked him to install a new, stronger lock. After he left, I sat in my living room surrounded by the photos they'd scattered, images of happier times when my children still looked at me with love instead of calculation. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Eleanor Walsh, asking if she had time to discuss estate planning and family law. The second was to a security company, arranging for cameras to be installed in my apartment. If my children wanted to play games, I would learn the rules. but I would not be the victim in their story. The nurse who had once saved lives knew how to protect herself, and the seamstress who had clothed her children in love would not let them strip her of dignity now. I began documenting everything. The broken lock, the visit from Dr. Martinez, the strange questions at dinner. I might have been old in their eyes, but I wasn't foolish, and I certainly wasn't the helpless, declining woman they seemed determined to paint me as. What they didn't know was that their schemes had awakened something in me. Not the gentle mother who had sacrificed everything for them, but the woman who had stood strong in emergency rooms, who had made life and death decisions without flinching. That Bernice was stirring and she was angry. The security cameras revealed more than I'd bargained for. Sandra visited twice while I was at doctor's appointments, times she somehow knew I'd be out. She wandered through my apartment, opening drawers, photographing documents with her phone. In my bedroom, she lingered at my jewelry box, though there was nothing there but costume pieces and my simple wedding ring. But it was Thomas's visit that truly broke my heart. My youngest, my baby, let himself in with the spare key I'd trustingly given him years ago. He went straight to my desk, methodically photographing every paper in my files. When he found my bank statements, he sat right there in my chair and made a phone call. "Yeah, I'm looking at them now," I heard him say through the camera's audio. "She's got about 8,000 in savings checking account runs, pretty low each month. Social Security and some seamstress work, that's it. No sign of any inheritance documents yet." I watched my son rifle through my private papers like a thief, and something inside me hardened. These weren't concerned children. They were vultures circling what they perceived as a dying animal. Eleanor Walsh listened to my story with the practiced calm of someone who'd seen family betrayals before. She took notes as I showed her the security footage, her expression growing grimmer with each revelation. "Bernice," she said when I finished, "I need you to understand something. Your children aren't just snooping. They're building a case for guardianship or conservatorship. The psychiatrist visit the questions about memory and finances, trying to move you to assisted living. These are all classic steps." "But why now?" I asked, though I suspected I knew. "Has anything changed recently? Any reason they might suddenly be interested in your finances?" I told her about the inheritance, how I'd kept it private. Eleanor's expression darkened further. "How would they have found out?" That question haunted me as I returned home. I'd been so careful, but then I remembered Patricia's real estate connections. Brooklyn property records were public. If she'd been searching, if she'd been monitoring. The confirmation came at the next family dinner. Patricia could barely contain her excitement, practically vibrating with energy as she picked at her salad. "Mother," she said with false casualness, "you know Brooklyn real estate is booming right now. Some of those old commercial buildings are worth millions." "Is that so?" I kept my voice neutral, cutting my chicken with steady hands. "Oh yes. In fact, there was this building that just changed hands. The Morrison Building on Atlantic Avenue. The previous owner died, left it to some nurse who saved her life years ago. Can you imagine talk about being in the right place at the right time?" The table went silent. Sandra shot Patricia a warning look while Robert suddenly became fascinated with his wine glass. Only Mark seemed oblivious to the tension scrolling through his phone as usual. "Interesting," I said mildly. "Lucky nurse." "Very lucky." Patricia continued ignoring her siblings' glares. "Worth over $2 million plus rental income. That nurse probably doesn't even know what to do with that kind of money." "Patricia." Sandra's voice carried a sharp edge. "What, I'm just making conversation about real estate. It's what I do." I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment to process this confirmation. In the mirror, I saw an old woman whose children viewed her as an obstacle to wealth. But I also saw Bernice Coleman, who had once worked 36-hour shifts, who had brought people back from the brink of death, who had raised 4 children alone. That woman wasn't going down without a fight. When I returned to the table, they'd shifted tactics. "Mother," Robert said smoothly, "we've been thinking. You're getting older, and managing everything alone must be difficult. What if we helped you with your finances? Set up a family trust. Make sure everything's properly managed. That's thoughtful, I replied, but I manage fine. Do you though? Sandra leaned forward. Thomas mentioned you seemed confused about your medication schedule last week. I turned to Thomas, who couldn't meet my eyes. Did I don't recall being confused. Well, that's the thing about confusion, Mark added helpfully. You don't always realize it's happening. The gaslighting was so blatant, so coordinated that I almost admired their teamwork. Almost. I appreciate your concern, I said firmly, but I'm perfectly capable of managing my affairs. The rest of the dinner was tense, full of meaningful looks between my children and subtle digs at my competence. When the check came, Robert insisted on paying, making a show of it. See, Mother, let us take care of you. It's what families do. Over the next few weeks, their campaign intensified. I found a business card for an elder law attorney tucked into my mail slot. My pharmacy called to confirm a change in my prescription that I hadn't authorized. My landlord mentioned that someone had inquired about my lease status and payment history. Then came the weekend. Thomas invited me to lunch at his apartment. I should have been suspicious, he'd been so distant lately, but the mother in me hoped he wanted to reconnect. His girlfriend Amy answered the door. She was a sweet girl elementary school teacher with kind eyes that reminded me of my own idealism at that age. She seemed nervous, fidgeting with her necklace as she led me to the living room. Thomas had prepared lunch, my favorite chicken salad, and we ate while making small talk about his work. It felt almost normal until he cleared his throat. Mom, I need to tell you something. We all love you, you know that, right? My guard went up immediately. Of course. And because we love you, we want what's best for you. Sandra found this great assisted living place in Jersey. Beautiful grounds, medical staff, on-site activities. Thomas, I'm not moving to a facility. Just hear me out. You could sell the apartment, use that money, plus your savings for a really nice place. No more worrying about maintenance or bills or cooking. I like cooking. I like my apartment. I'm not interested. His face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. You're not being reasonable. Do you know what your apartment is worth now? The neighborhood's gentrified. You're sitting on a gold mine while living like a pauper. That's my choice to make. Is it, though? When you're making decisions that affect the whole family, how does where I live affect you? He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. You could help us all, Mom. Sandra's kids need college funds. Robert's trying to buy a house. Patricia wants to start her own firm. I've got student loans. But you're just hoarding. Hoarding. The word stung. I raised you on seamstress wages. I went without so you could have school supplies and soccer cleats and prom dresses. I never asked for anything back. And we're grateful, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. But now you have means to help and you're being selfish. Amy had been silent throughout this exchange, but I saw her flinch at his words. When Thomas went to the kitchen to get dessert, she leaned toward me. Mrs. Coleman, she whispered quickly, I'm so sorry. I told him this was wrong. They had a whole meeting about it last week at Sandra's house. They think you have more money than you're telling them. Thomas has been so different since they started this plan. Thomas returned before she could say more, but her words confirmed what I'd suspected. This was coordinated, calculated, and cruel. As I left that day, Thomas hugged me, and I felt like I was embracing a stranger. In the elevator, I made a decision. If they wanted to play dirty, it was time I showed them that their mother wasn't the easy mark they believed her to be. That evening, I called Eleanor Walsh. I need to know everything about protecting myself from a hostile conservatorship attempt, and I need you to help me set up a trust that they can't touch. Good, she said simply. Come see me tomorrow, and Bernice, start keeping a journal. Document everything, every interaction, every strange event, every attempt to undermine you. We're going to need it. I hung up feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Not just anger or hurt, but determination. My children had forgotten who raised them, who stayed up with their fevers and mended their hearts and cheered their victories. They saw weakness where there was merely kindness, vulnerability where there was simply love. They were about to learn that their mother was far more than they'd ever imagined. I began my journal that very night, documenting everything I could remember from the past months. The broken storage lock, the psychiatrist visit, the security footage, Amy's whispered warning. As I wrote, patterns emerged that made my blood run cold. This wasn't a recent scheme. Looking back, I could see the groundwork being laid months ago, maybe longer. The journal became my confidant and my weapon. Every strange phone call, every unexpected visit, every probing question went into its pages. I wrote in the early morning hours when sleep eluded me, finding clarity and transforming my swirling thoughts into evidence. 2 weeks after my lunch with Thomas, I received a call from Sandra. "Mother, wonderful news. I got promoted to senior vice president. Congratulations, dear." I said, genuinely pleased despite everything. A mother's love doesn't simply switch off even when that love isn't returned. "We're celebrating next month at Le Bernardin. You know that fancy French place in Midtown. Mark's treating the whole family." Le Bernardin. I knew it by reputation, the kind of place where dinner cost more than my monthly grocery budget. That sounds lovely. "Well, it's quite exclusive. They have a dress code and everything. Very particular about their clientele." Her tone suggested I might not meet their standards. "But don't worry about it. We'll have a separate celebration with you somewhere more suitable." The slight was so obvious that I almost laughed. "I understand. Enjoy your special dinner." But as we hung up, suspicion nagged at me. Sandra wasn't usually this transparent in her cruelty. I called the restaurant myself, claiming to be confirming a Coleman reservation. "Ah, yes," the hostess said. "Party of 5 for the 23rd, 7:30. 5, not 6. They weren't planning a separate celebration. They simply weren't planning to include me at all. The hurt might have crushed the old Bernice, but this new version, the one keeping journals and consulting lawyers, felt something different. Curiosity. What were they planning? My answer came from an unexpected source. Amy called me the following week, speaking in hushed tones. "Mrs. Coleman, I shouldn't be doing this, but I can't stand by anymore. Can we meet somewhere Thomas won't know?" We met at a small coffee shop in Queens, far from any of my children's usual haunts. Amy looked exhausted, stress etching lines around her young eyes. "They're planning something for the restaurant," she said without preamble. "Thomas thinks I don't understand, but I've heard enough. They want to stage some kind of public confrontation." "What kind of confrontation?" She pulled out her phone, showing me screenshots of text messages she'd taken. "Patricia found out about your inheritance. Really found out, I mean. The full amount. She has a friend who works in property records, and then Mark hired some private investigator to dig deeper." My coffee turned to acid in my stomach as I read their messages. They knew about the building, the rental income, even had estimates of my net worth that were frighteningly accurate. "The restaurant thing," Amy continued, "they're going to have you show up somehow, then publicly embarrass you. Make a scene about you being confused, unable to handle money, needing their help. They've already told the staff there might be an incident with an elderly relative." "Why are you telling me this?" Tears filled her eyes. "Because this isn't the man I fell in love with. Thomas used to talk about you with such affection. How you worked 2 jobs to pay for his coding camp. How you sold your mother's ring to buy him a computer. Now all he talks about is what you owe them." "I don't owe them anything," I said quietly. "I know that. You know that. But they've convinced themselves otherwise." She gathered her things to leave, then paused. "There's one more thing. Thomas has been researching someone named Marcus Sterling. He owns Le Bernardin. Apparently you knew him." The name hit me like a physical blow. Marcus Sterling. I hadn't thought about him in years, though I'd followed his career distantly through newspaper articles. The young man whose life I'd saved had become one of New York's most celebrated restaurateurs. It had been 25 years ago during one of my last shifts at Kings County. Gang violence had spilled into the emergency room, and Marcus, barely 20, had been caught in the crossfire. A bystander in the wrong place shot twice in the abdomen. The trauma surgeon had given him a 10% chance. But I'd seen something in that young man's eyes, a fierce will to live, that reminded me of my late husband's fighting spirit. I'd stayed with him through the surgery, monitored his vitals with obsessive care, talked to him during his conscious moments about his dreams of becoming a chef. When his blood pressure dropped dangerously in recovery, I'd been the one to notice the internal bleeding the scans had missed. That catch had saved his life. He'd recovered, fully gone on to culinary school, and built an empire. We'd exchanged Christmas cards for a few years before losing touch. I had no idea if he'd even remember me. After Amy left, I sat in that coffee shop for a long time, piecing together my children's plan. They would somehow manipulate me into appearing at the restaurant, create a scene that painted me as a confused old woman who couldn't handle her affairs, and use it as evidence for their guardianship case. Public humiliation as a legal strategy. But they'd made one crucial error. They'd chosen Marcus Sterling's restaurant. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in 25 years. I called Kings County Hospital and asked for the records department. It took some doing, but I eventually connected with someone who could help me access my old commendations and records. I needed proof of who I'd been, of the life I'd saved. Then I did something else. I called Bernardin and asked to speak to Mr. Sterling's office. His assistant was polite but firm he was unavailable. But when I mentioned I was Bernice Coleman, the nurse from Kings County in 1999, she paused. "Hold, please." The next voice on the line was deep, warm, and instantly familiar. Bernice Coleman. Is this really you?" "Hello, Marcus. I wasn't sure you'd remember me." "Remember you?" His laugh was rich with emotion. "I've told the story of the nurse who saved my life at every major interview. You're the reason I name a scholarship every year. How are you? Where are you? Can we meet?" I explained haltingly that my family had reservations at his restaurant next month. He listened without interrupting, though I could hear his breathing change when I mentioned the planned humiliation. "Bernice," he said when I finished, "you saved my life when everyone else had given up. Now it seems I have a chance to return the favor in a small way. Let me ask you something, and please be honest. Your children believe you're coming to the restaurant that night. They're planning to ensure it somehow. I'm not sure of the details yet." "Good, then you'll come. But not as they expect. You'll come as my personal guest, and Bernice wear whatever makes you comfortable. At my restaurant, heroes don't need designer clothes." After we hung up, I sat in my small apartment and felt something shift inside me. For months, I'd been playing defense, documenting their schemes, protecting myself from their attacks. But maybe it was time to go on offense. I called Eleanor Walsh and updated her on everything. She listened thoughtfully, then said, "Bernice, I've been thinking. The inheritance documents showed that you were an initial investor in Sterling's restaurant, a silent partner from the early days. Did you know that?" I hadn't. Evelyn Morrison, it seemed, had invested in Marcus's dream on my behalf, using my name. $10,000 in 1999 had grown into a 15% stake in what was now a multi-million-dollar restaurant group. "My God," I breathed. "Indeed, your children think they're taking you to a restaurant to humiliate you. They have no idea you own part of it." The irony was so perfect I had to laugh. Not the bitter laugh of recent months, but real, genuine laughter. My children, in their greed and cruelty, had chosen the one place in New York where I wasn't just welcome, I was royalty. "Eleanor," I said when I caught my breath, "I need you to prepare everything. The trust documents, the inheritance papers, evidence of the conservatorship attempt, everything." "What are you planning?" "I'm going to give my children exactly what they want. A public scene they'll never forget." The 23rd arrived with the kind of crisp October evening that made New York feel like a movie set. I'd spent the day preparing carefully, not in the way my children might have expected, with anxiety and tears, but with the same methodical precision I'd once used before major surgeries. I chose my outfit deliberately. Not the designer clothes Patricia always pushed me toward, but my best modest dress, navy blue with small pearl buttons, the one I'd worn to Thomas's college graduation, simple pearl earrings James had given me for our 10th anniversary, my comfortable walking shoes polished to a shine. I looked exactly like what I was, a retired seamstress from Queens dressed in her finest. The call from Sandra came at 6:45, right on schedule. "Mother, oh, good you're home. Listen, there's been a mix-up with the reservation. The restaurant called about confirming the party size and somehow they have us down for 6 instead of 5. Her voice was breathless with false concern, the performance of a lifetime. In the background, I could hear Patricia coaching her. "Oh dear," I played along. "What a shame." "Well, here's the thing. Since you're already planning to be home tonight, we thought, why don't you come down, just to say hello? You don't have to stay for dinner. Of course, the prices are astronomical, but you could see the place, maybe have a glass of water at the bar while we eat." The cruelty of it was breathtaking, inviting me to watch them dine while I sat at the bar like a beggar at the feast. "That's thoughtful of you to include me," I said mildly. "Wonderful. We're meeting there at 7:30. Just tell them you're with the Coleman party. Oh, and Mother, it's a very upscale place. Maybe your black dress." "I'll do my best." I hung up and looked at myself in the mirror. Bernice Coleman, 68 years old, about to face down the children she'd given everything for. I picked up my purse, checked that Eleanor's documents were secure in my tote bag, and headed out to hail a taxi. The ride to Midtown felt both eternal and too quick. I watched the city lights blur past, remembering all the times I'd made this journey for different reasons. School, plays, parent-teacher conferences, graduation ceremonies, always rushing to be there for them, always putting their needs first. Le Bernardin stood like a temple to fine dining, its elegant facade intimidating and inviting in equal measure. Through the windows, I could see the soft lighting, the white tablecloths, the kind of refined atmosphere that whispered money with every detail. I stood across the street for a moment watching. There they were, my 4 children already seated at a table for 5. Sandra in her power suit gesturing animatedly. Robert checking his Rolex, the one he'd bought to impress clients. Patricia scrolling through her phone, probably calculating property values. And Thomas, my baby, laughing at something Mark had said. They looked successful, accomplished everything I'd worked to help them become. They also looked like strangers. Taking a deep breath, I crossed the street and entered the restaurant. The hostess smiled professionally. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm with the Coleman party. They're already seated." Her expression shifted subtly. Yes, they mentioned you might stop by. They're at table 12, but they asked me to let them know when you arrived. If you'd like to wait at the bar." The dismissal was polite but clear. I'd been relegated to the bar before even asking. "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone, "I'd like to speak with Marcus Sterling. Could you tell him Bernice Coleman is here?" The hostess frowned. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling is very busy this evening. Perhaps you could—" "Bernice." The voice came from behind me, warm and familiar. I turned to find Marcus Sterling himself, looking distinguished in his chef's whites, his face breaking into a genuine smile. He'd aged well, the scared 20-year-old transformed into a confident man in his 40s, but his eyes held the same warmth I remembered. "Marcus," I said, suddenly feeling shy. He crossed the space between us in 2 strides and engulfed me in a hug that spoke of genuine affection and gratitude. The hostess's eyes widened. "I've been watching for you," he said, pulling back to study my face. "You look exactly as I remember. Come, we have so much to catch up on." That's when I saw my children notice us. Sandra's mouth fell open. Robert half stood from his chair. Patricia dropped her phone. Thomas went pale. Marcus followed my gaze, and his expression hardened slightly. "The Coleman party. Your family—" "Yes." The ones who made a reservation for 5 then called to add a 6th, then suggested you might sit at the bar. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I see." He turned to the hostess. "Melissa, please prepare the chef's table for Mrs. Coleman. Full service, my personal menu." Then louder to the room at large. "Everyone, may I have your attention? This woman, Bernice Coleman, is the reason I'm standing here today. 25 years ago, she saved my life at Kings County Hospital when everyone else had given up. She is a hero, my personal hero, and an honored guest in this establishment." The restaurant fell silent. Other diners turned to look some raising glasses in acknowledgement. My children sat frozen at their table faces, cycling through expressions of shock, confusion, and dawning horror. Marcus offered me his arm. "Shall we?" As we walked past their table, Patricia found her voice. "Mother, you know him." "Hello, dear," I said pleasantly. "Enjoying your celebration?" Sandra stood abruptly. "There must be some mistake. Our mother is she's a seamstress from Queens." Marcus turned to her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Your mother was a trauma nurse who saved countless lives, including mine. The fact that you don't know this says more about you than her." Mark for once was speechless. Robert looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. Thomas wouldn't meet my eyes. "Enjoy your dinner," I said, allowing Marcus to lead me away. "The prices are astronomical, I hear." The chef's table was a private alcove with a view of the kitchen, the best seat in the house. Marcus personally poured wine of vintage that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Now," he said, settling across from me, "tell me everything, and I mean everything." So I did. As courses appeared like magic, each more exquisite than the last, I told him about James's death, about leaving nursing, about raising 4 children on seamstress wages, about their recent betrayal, the inheritance they'd discovered their plans for this very evening. His face darkened with each revelation. "They planned to humiliate you here in my restaurant." They didn't know about our connection. "Still," he signaled a waiter, "send my sommelier to table 12. Have him explain that their wine selection is inadequate for such a special occasion. Suggest the 95 Chateau Latour. Don't mention the price until they've ordered it." "Marcus, you don't have to." "Bernice, you held my hand while I was dying. You talked to me about my dreams when everyone thought I wouldn't make it to morning. You caught the bleeding that would have killed me. I owe you everything." He paused. "Besides, did Eleanor tell you about Evelyn Morrison's investment? That I'm somehow a 15% owner, I still can't believe it." "Believe it. Evelyn came to me in the early days, said she was investing on behalf of the woman who'd saved her life. Your name has been on our documents from the beginning. You've been receiving dividends in a trust account for 20 years. My head spun. I had no idea. Nearly $4 million last I checked. Evelyn insisted we never contact you directly, said you'd refuse it out of pride. But it's there waiting for you." Through the kitchen window, I could see my children at their table. The sommelier was there now, Sandra nodding eagerly at his suggestions, while Robert tried to discreetly Google wine prices on his phone. Their plan to embarrass me was costing them a fortune. "There's something else," Marcus said. "I had my people do some checking after we spoke. The psychiatrist who visited you. She lost her license in New Jersey for falsely declaring elderly patients incompetent. The lawyer they've been consulting specializes in hostile conservatorships. They weren't just planning to embarrass you, Bernice. They were planning to take everything." The last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't just greed. This was a coordinated assault on my autonomy, my dignity, my life. "Well," I said, surprising myself with my calm, "they've certainly made their position clear." Marcus studied me. "You have that look, the same one you had when you decided I was going to live despite the odds. What are you planning?" I smiled, feeling more like myself than I had in years. "I'm planning to give them exactly what they deserve, but first I'm going to enjoy this incredible meal with an old friend. Tell me about your journey. How did a scared kid from Brooklyn become the toast of New York?" For the next hour, we talked and laughed, the years falling away. Marcus told me about culinary school, about his struggles, his triumphs. He showed me pictures of his wife and children, naming his eldest daughter Hope, after the emotion I'd given him that night. Meanwhile, I watched my children's table with peripheral vision. The wine had arrived along with their meals, but something was wrong. Other diners kept glancing at them, whispering. Sandra looked increasingly uncomfortable. Patricia kept checking her phone with growing alarm. "Did you do something?" I asked Marcus. His smile was innocent. "I may have mentioned to a few regular patrons that the Table 12 party had suggested their elderly mother should sit at the bar while they celebrated. New York society has opinions about such behavior. Indeed, I could see the subtle but unmistakable signs of social shunning. Neighboring tables angled away, waiters, while professionally correct, lacked warmth. My children were learning that cruelty to one's mother didn't play well among the wealthy elite they so desperately wanted to join. Mrs. Coleman. A woman approached our table elegant in designer wear. I'm Joyce Patterson. I couldn't help overhearing earlier. I just wanted to say that anyone who treats their mother that way has no place in polite society. I'll be sure to mention this to my friends on the charity boards. After she left, Marcus chuckled. Joyce Patterson's opinion can make or break someone socially in this city. Your daughter's marketing firm depends on those connections. I thought I should feel guilty watching my children's evening crumble. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, justice beginning to be served. Now, Marcus said, signaling for dessert, let's discuss what happens next. Because if they think tonight was bad, wait until they learn about the trust the restaurant stake and the criminal investigation Eleanor's about to unleash on that fake psychiatrist. Looking at my children one more time, seeing their confusion and growing distress, I raised my wine glass. To new beginnings. And old friendships, Marcus added, clinking his glass against mine. The night was far from over, but already I felt the balance of power shifting. My children had expected to find a weak old woman. Instead, they'd discovered that their mother had been a hero all along. And heroes, I was learning, didn't go down without a fight. Marcus led me to a private dining room after our meal, a stunning space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. I thought you might prefer privacy for what comes next, he explained just as Eleanor Walsh arrived with 2 associates. Bernice. Eleanor greeted me warmly, then nodded to Marcus. Mr. Sterling, thank you for accommodating us. They'd clearly coordinated this. Eleanor spread documents across the mahogany table while her associates set up recording equipment. Through the glass doors, I could see my children still at their table, their celebration thoroughly soured. The bill had arrived, and Robert's face had turned an interesting shade of purple. Before we begin, Eleanor said, you should know that Mr. Kowalski, your superintendent, has provided us with the security footage of Mark breaking into your storage unit. We also have the recordings from your apartment cameras showing Sandra and Thomas searching your home without permission. Additionally, one of her associates added, Dr. Helen Martinez, the psychiatrist Sandra brought to evaluate you, is currently under investigation for fraud in 3 states. She's been part of a ring that specifically targets elderly people with assets. My heart clenched. My own daughter had brought a criminal into my home. The good news, Eleanor continued, is that you have grounds for both criminal charges and civil action. The bad news is that your children have been more thorough than we initially thought. They've already filed preliminary paperwork questioning your competence. However, Marcus interjected, that filing is about to become problematic for them. You see, they listed your assets as your apartment and modest savings. They failed to disclose the inheritance because they planned to discover it after gaining control. But failing to disclose known assets in a guardianship filing is fraud. Through the glass, I saw a waiter approach my children's table and speak quietly to Sandra. Her face went white. She stood, followed by the others, and they made their way toward the private dining room. Showtime, Eleanor murmured, arranging the documents strategically. The door burst open, Sandra leading the charge. Mother, what is going on? They're saying we need to speak with you before we can leave. There's been a misunderstanding about the bill, Robert added, his voice tight. They're claiming it's over $8,000 for 5 people. The 1995 Chateau Latour alone was $6,000, Marcus said mildly. Perhaps you should have asked the price before ordering. We didn't order that, Mark protested. The sommelier recommended it. After you insisted on only the finest for such a special celebration, Marcus replied. We have recordings of all tableside conversations, of course. Standard practice for liability reasons. Patricia finally noticed Eleanor and the legal documents. Who are these people? My attorneys, I said simply. Please sit down. We have several matters to discuss. They remained standing, clustered near the door like trapped animals. Eleanor cleared her throat. First, let me introduce myself. Eleanor Walsh, senior partner at Walsh Brennan and Associates. I specialize in elder law and financial crimes. These are my associates James Chen and Maria Santos. Financial crimes, Thomas echoed weakly. Yes, specifically the attempted financial exploitation of Bernice Coleman through fraud breaking and entering harassment and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. This is ridiculous, Sandra sputtered. We're her children. Which makes your actions particularly heinous under New York law. Eleanor continued smoothly. Now we can do this the easy way or the hard way. The easy way involves you sitting down and listening. The hard way involves the 2 FBI agents waiting in the lobby. That was a bluff, but they didn't know that. One by one, they sank into chairs. Eleanor pulled out a tablet and began playing video. There was Sandra, clear as day, photographing my bank statements. Thomas rifling through my desk. Mark breaking into my storage unit. These videos have been authenticated and provided to law enforcement, Eleanor stated. Additionally, we have recordings of your meetings planning to have Mrs. Coleman declared incompetent. She played audio from Amy's phone, my children's voices, discussing how to make me appear confused, how to hide assets, how to manipulate the system. Patricia was crying now. Robert had his head in his hands. Sandra kept shaking her head as if she could deny reality. Mark looked like he wanted to run. Only Thomas met my eyes, and what I saw there might have been shame. Here's what's going to happen, Eleanor continued. You're going to withdraw any and all filings regarding Mrs. Coleman's competence. You're going to sign documents acknowledging that she is fully capable of managing her own affairs. You're going to return any items taken from her apartment and storage unit, and you're going to cease all contact unless she initiates it. Or, Sandra challenged some of her corporate bravado returning. Or we proceed with criminal charges, breaking and entering conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and in Mark's case, interstate fraud related to his unauthorized investigation of Mrs. Coleman's finances using his company's resources. Mark went pale. You can't prove that. Eleanor smiled. Your company's IT department was very helpful when subpoenaed. Turns out they frown on employees using corporate databases for personal vendettas. As for the rest of you, Marcus added, I've already spoken to Joyce Patterson and several other influential diners who witnessed your behavior tonight. Word travels fast in certain circles. Sandra, I believe your firm depends on Patterson Communications for 40% of its billing. Robert, your company's board, includes 3 of my regular patrons. Patricia, half your real estate clients dine here monthly. And Thomas, your tech firm, is hoping to land the restaurant group's analytics contract, aren't they? The threat was clear, professional and social ruin. You can't do this, Robert said desperately. We're her children. We were just concerned. Stop. My voice cut through his protests. Everyone turned to look at me. Just stop. For once in your lives, stop lying. I stood feeling every one of my 68 years, but also feeling stronger than I had in decades. You weren't concerned. You were greedy. You discovered I had money and you wanted it. You were willing to destroy me to get it. Your own mother. The woman who worked 18-hour days to keep you fed, who sold blood plasma to buy your school supplies, who went without so you could have. Mom, Thomas started. I'm not finished. Do you want to know the irony? I was planning to share the inheritance with you. Not because I owed you, but because I loved you. Because that's what mothers do. But you couldn't wait. You couldn't trust. You had to take. I pulled out a folder Eleanor had prepared. This is my will as it stood 3 months ago. Each of you was to receive 25% of my estate. Equal shares because I loved you equally despite your flaws. I pulled out a second folder. This is my new will. Thomas, because you showed a glimmer of conscience. Because Amy tried to warn me, you'll receive a trust fund for your future children's education. The rest of you get nothing, not 1 penny. You can't, Patricia gasped. I can, and I have. The building in Brooklyn, the restaurant shares the accumulated dividends. All of it will go to charity, specifically to nursing scholarships for students from low-income families, kids who understand the value of hard work and sacrifice. Sandra was sobbing now, ugly tears that ruined her perfect makeup. Mom, please, we made a mistake. We're sorry. No, you're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. I turned to Eleanor. Are we done here? Almost. There's the matter of tonight's bill. Robert laughed bitterly. We can't afford $8,000 for one dinner. Then perhaps you should have thought of that before ordering wine that costs more than your mother's monthly income, Marcus said. However, I'm willing to make a deal. Sign the documents Eleanor has prepared right now and I'll comp the meal as a favor to Bernice. They had no choice. One by one, they signed papers acknowledging my full mental competence, agreeing to cease all contact and waiving any future claims to my estate. As they prepared to leave, beaten and humiliated, I called out, Thomas, stay a moment. He hung back as the others filed out, Sandra still crying, Robert supporting Patricia Mark, already on his phone, probably calling a divorce lawyer. Amy's a good woman, I told him quietly. Don't let this poison what you have with her. Learn from it. Be better. Tears rolled down his cheeks. Mom, I'm so sorry. I knew it was wrong, but they kept saying you'd never know that we were protecting you. I know. That's why you get the trust fund. Not for you, but for your children. Teach them better than I apparently taught you. He hugged me then, and for a moment I had my baby boy back. Then he too was gone, leaving me with Eleanor and Marcus in that beautiful room overlooking the city. You all right? Marcus asked gently. I will be, I said and meant it. It hurts, but not as much as continuing to pretend they loved me would have hurt. Eleanor packed up her documents. I'll file everything tomorrow. The restraining orders will be in place by end of business. The criminal complaints might take longer, but Mark at least is looking at federal charges. After she left, Marcus and I sat in companionable silence watching the city lights. For what it's worth, he said finally, I think you're incredible. The strength it took to do that. I was a trauma nurse, I reminded him. Sometimes you have to cut away the infected tissue to save the patient. And now, I considered the question. Now I start over. At 68, I get to decide who I want to be when I grow up. Marcus laughed. Well, you're always welcome here. In fact, I have a proposition. We're starting a program where experienced professionals mentor young chefs from disadvantaged backgrounds. Someone with your background, your strength, your story. You'd be perfect. I don't know anything about cooking professionally. You know about working under pressure, about sacrifice, about building something from nothing. That's what these kids need to learn. Think about it. I promised I would. As he walked me out past the table where my children had sat, I felt a chapter closing. But more importantly, I felt a new one beginning. Outside, Marcus had his driver waiting to take me home. As we pulled away, I looked back at Bernardin one last time. In trying to humiliate me, my children had instead freed me. The woman who entered that restaurant had been their victim. The woman leaving it was her own person, with her own money, her own choices, and her own future. And for the first time in months, that future looked bright. 3 months later, I stood in my new apartment on the Upper West Side, boxes still scattered around me, watching Snowdust Central Park. The space was modest by Manhattan standards, but luxurious compared to my Queens apartment. 2 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and windows that actually opened. More importantly, it was mine, chosen and paid for with my own money. My phone rang. Eleanor's name appeared on the screen. Good morning, Bernice. I thought you'd want to know. Mark took a plea deal. 18 months federal prison, 3 years probation. I set down my coffee cup processing this. And Sandra, devastated from what I hear. The divorce is final next month. She's lost the house, half her clients, and most of her social standing. Patricia's real estate license was permanently revoked after the investigation revealed she'd been accessing client financial data. She's working as a receptionist at a dental office. Robert, terminated from his firm for ethics violations. Last I heard, he was living with a cousin in New Jersey trying to find work. Each piece of news brought a mix of vindication and sorrow. These were still my children, even if they'd forgotten I was their mother. And Thomas, Eleanor's voice softened. Following through with therapy. He and Amy are engaged. She sent a letter asking if you'd consider coming to the wedding. I have it here if you'd like me to forward it. Yes, I said without hesitation. Forward it. After we hung up, I continued unpacking, pulling out photo albums I'd rescued from my old apartment. Pictures of better times, Sandra's first day of kindergarten, Robert's Little League championship, Patricia's dance recital, Thomas's science fair win. I'd been so proud of them once. A knock interrupted my reminiscing. Through the peephole, I saw Amy standing nervously in the hallway. Amy. I opened the door, genuinely surprised. How did you... Thomas doesn't know I'm here, she said quickly. May I come in? I led her to my kitchen, still bare but functional. She looked around, taking in the boxes, the new beginning. I wanted to thank you, she began, for giving Thomas another chance, for the trust fund, for showing me who he really is so I could decide if that's someone I can build a life with. And have you decided? He's in therapy twice a week. He's cut off contact with his siblings except for supervised family counseling. He cries sometimes about what he almost did, what he almost lost. So yes, I've decided. People can change if they want to badly enough. I poured her tea using my good china for the first time in the new space. You're a brave woman, Amy, braver than I was at your age. You're the bravest person I know, she countered, which is why I'm really here. I have a proposition. She pulled out a folder, hands trembling slightly. I teach at PS 41 in the Bronx. Low-income kids, mostly immigrants, 90% on free lunch. We just lost our after-school program funding. I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be sorry. Help. She pushed the folder toward me. I've written a grant proposal for a new program. Life skills and mentorship for at-risk youth. Sewing, basic medical training, financial literacy, college prep. Everything you taught your own children, plus everything you've learned since. I opened the folder, scanning her detailed plans. This is ambitious. The Eleanor and Marcus Sterling Foundation thinks so too. They've agreed to fund it if we can find the right director. Someone with experience in both medical and practical skills. Someone who understands struggle and success. Someone like you. My throat tightened. Marcus and Eleanor had created a foundation named after both of them. I don't have a teaching degree, I said weakly. You have something better. You have life. These kids don't need another person with credentials telling them what to do. They need someone who's been where they are and made it out. I thought about my empty days, about the purpose I'd lost when my children no longer needed me, about skills sitting dormant and stories untold. When would I start? Amy's face lit up. Monday, the principal's already approved it. We have space, we have funding, we just need you. Monday, 3 days away. I looked around my half-unpacked apartment at the photo albums full of memories at this young woman offering me a chance to matter again. I'll do it. Amy hugged me impulsively, then blushed at her forwardness. As she gathered her things to leave, she paused at the door. Bernice Thomas and I are getting married in June. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. You're his only family now. Will you come? I'll be there. That Monday, I walked into PS 41, wearing my comfortable shoes and best cardigan, carrying a bag full of sewing supplies and hard-won wisdom. 23 sixth graders stared at me with suspicious eyes, kids who'd been disappointed by adults too many times. Good morning, I said, settling into the teacher's chair like I belonged there. I'm Mrs. Coleman, but you can call me Mrs. C. I'm here to teach you some things that might help in life. But first, I want to know about you. What do you want to learn? What do you dream about? Slowly, tentatively, hands went up. A girl wanted to learn to hem her own pants because her mother worked 3 jobs. A boy wondered if he could really become a doctor even though nobody in his family had finished high school. Another girl asked if it was true that I'd been a nurse who saved people. All good questions, I said. And yes, I was a nurse. Let me tell you about a night 25 years ago when a young man not much older than you came in with gunshot wounds. As I told Marcus's story, I saw their eyes change. I wasn't just another old lady with a curriculum. I was someone who understood that life could be hard and unfair and still worth fighting for. That first day set the pattern. Mondays, we worked on practical sewing skills. Wednesdays, basic first aid and health education. Fridays, what I called life skills. Everything from budgeting to college applications to conflict resolution. But woven through it all were stories, lessons learned from triumphs and failures alike. The program grew. Parents started attending, wanting to learn alongside their children. Other teachers asked to sit in. The principal joked that I was taking over her school. 6 months in at Thomas and Amy's wedding, I sat in the front row as the mother of the groom. It was a small affair, just as Amy had promised, held in a community garden in Brooklyn. No designer gowns or $6,000 wine, just two people promising to build something better together. Sandra, Robert, and Patricia weren't there, of course. The restraining orders were still in effect, and more importantly, Thomas had chosen to move forward without them. But I'd heard things through Eleanor. Sandra was in therapy herself, now working at a nonprofit that helped women rebuild after divorce. Robert had found work at a small firm that valued ethics over ambition. Patricia had gone back to school studying social work of all things. Maybe they were learning too. Maybe someday, but that was for the future to decide. "You look happy," Marcus said, finding me during the reception. He'd insisted on catering the wedding as a gift, turning the simple garden into a wonderland of delicate flavors and beautiful presentations. I am, I realized with some surprise, genuinely happy. "Good, you deserve it." He handed me a glass of champagne. "Eleanor tells me the program at PS 41 has been nominated for a City Excellence Award." "The kids deserve it, not me." "The kids deserve you," he corrected. "By the way, I have 60 applications for next year's program. You might need an assistant." I thought about those applications, about 60 more kids who needed what I could offer, about skills I'd thought were forgotten being passed to new hands, about purpose found in unexpected places. "I know just the person," I said, thinking of one of my current students' mothers, a woman who reminded me of myself 30 years ago, talented, struggling, needing a chance. As the evening wound down, Amy pulled me aside. "I have something for you," she said, handing me an envelope. Inside was a handmade card decorated with careful stitches, clearly the work of my students. "Thank you for teaching us that heroes don't always wear capes," it read. "Sometimes they wear cardigans and comfortable shoes." Each child had signed it along with a note about what they'd learned. Hemming techniques mixed with life philosophies, medical terminology alongside dreams for the future. My eyes blurred with tears. The good kind, the kind that came from knowing you'd found your place in the world again. Later that night, back in my apartment, I sat by those windows overlooking Central Park and reflected on the journey. My children had tried to take everything from me, but in doing so, they'd given me something precious, the push I needed to discover who I was beyond mother. I was Bernice Coleman, trauma nurse, seamstress, teacher, mentor, survivor, hero, according to some, though I still struggled with that word. Mostly, I was a woman who'd learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living well, giving generously, and finding purpose in lifting others up. My phone buzzed with a text from one of my students excited about being accepted into a pre-med summer program. Another from Amy with ultrasound photos. I was going to be a grandmother. One from Marcus about expanding the mentorship program to his other restaurants. Even one from Eleanor about a scholarship recipient, wanting to meet the woman who'd made their nursing education possible. I had lost 4 children but gained dozens more. Lost family but found community. Lost my old life but discovered one that fit better anyway. Through my window, I watched the city lights twinkle like stars, each one representing a life, a story, a possibility. Once I'd seen only endings in those lights. Now I saw beginnings. And mine was just getting started. If you've stayed with me through this journey, thank you. Sharing my story hasn't been easy, but I believe there's power in truth even when it's painful. I often wonder what you would have done in my place. Could you have stood up to your own children when they saw you as nothing more than a problem to be solved and a resource to be exploited? Would you have found the strength to choose yourself after a lifetime of choosing others? We all face moments when those we love most become strangers, when the people we sacrificed everything for forget the weight of that sacrifice. Maybe it's not as dramatic as what happened to me, but betrayal comes in many forms. The child who only calls when they need money, the family member who sees your kindness as weakness, the loved ones who mistake your quiet strength for insignificance. So I leave you with this question. What would it take for you to recognize your own worth, independent of how others, even family, value you? And more importantly, what dreams have you put on hold? What parts of yourself have you buried in the name of being needed? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family who took you for granted? Have you discovered new purpose later in life? Your stories matter, and they might just help someone else find their courage. If this story resonated with you, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to hear more stories of resilience, redemption, and the complicated truth about family. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to start over, never too late to choose yourself. Thank you for listening to an old woman's tale of loss and discovery. May you find the strength to write your own story, one where you're the hero you've always been. With love and hope for your journey, Bernice. Remember, true wealth isn't measured in money, but in the lives you touch. Those who judge by appearances may miss the diamonds among them. And sometimes the greatest gift our children can give us is the push to discover who we are beyond being their parent. Until we meet again in another story, another truth, another journey of the heart.